everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on a very interesting topic, frozen future, saving our glaciers for South Asia. This is very important because we have Himalayas and Himalaya affected by these glaciers. And definitely we need to discuss because of these geopolitical issues, the geographical issues. Bangladesh, India, they have around Bangladesh have around 105 rivers. So understanding this topic is very important, and as you know, we are heavily promoting our sessions with the politicians, with the corporations, with NGO, universities, and it will be very important sessions for South Asia, those who want to build up this uh, regional through this Himalaya, through this Ganga, through this Bay of Bengal and Podda. So we have our world famous speaker, Mr. Allen, Mr. Rob Enderley, and Mr. David Smith. And today's shows definitely we're going to share with all of the important institutions in South Asia. So it will be very educative, and through this process, our policymaker may make decisions. We are planning to launch more conference. We are doing more research, publishing more book, but definitely we need urban planning. And David is helping our World Talent Economic Forum through this urban planning action and many smart city projects also integrating through this process. So let's discuss with these things. Definitely, it's a critical things. Mr. Allen, my first question for you: what are the primary human and natural factors contributing to the accelerated melting of glacier worldwide, and how do this change impact good sea levels and freshwater supplies?
That's a great question, and that it's probably more than I can get into in an hour. But there's a lot of research on that. Um, there's a simple point that I think is often missed, and I want to bring up as a precursor to answering that question, and that is that contrary to what you hear in the news, our planet is cooling. It is our climate that's warming. So I think if we take a distinction between what's happening below the crust and what's happening above, I think we'll realize that the core of our planet is molten. And every time there's a volcano or the micro fraction of a move in the tectonic plates, hot air is released, or heat anyway, which heats the air. And I think if we know that, I think it will. And we do know that. Scientists understand that. It's the general population that seems to think that everything is getting hotter, and that is not the case. At some point, this will be a cold rock, some point before the heat death of the universe. But so my point goes into yeah, there is the Anthropocene, as we call it, where we're the ones really making an impact on the climate. Our greenhouse gas emissions, they trap heat, they raise the temperature of the atmosphere. They also trap our own terrestrial heat that's released into the atmosphere, plus solar heat that's released into the atmosphere. And this also raises the ocean temperatures, which, this is 2025, the year of saving the glaciers. I just found out that it was in the second half of December of 2025 that was the case. But I don't know. I can't fault the UN for not giving me a personal message. But it would have it would have been nice to know that before I had 2 weeks to work on the issue. But it's the problem is not that warmer oceans flood glacier margins and then create calving of ice into the ocean. That's the problem. But the problem is that we're getting a lot more fresh water into an ecosystem that thrives on being salinated, and so there's real concerns about that. Now, one concern that I think is not addressed enough is that every time the glaciers get smaller, our actual planetary albedo gets lessened, because it is primarily big white ice caps that are reflecting light back from space. Um, and so there is an accelerating effect as it moves white ice, which is just like that, into space for the most part. But while we're doing that, as that gets smaller, instead we absorb that heat more directly. And I think as the ice caps get smaller, that heat production will increase. As for the future, I mean, uh, I think the IPCC, the International IC, whatever the UN's body of research is, I think it's interesting to note that if you dive into the research, they make very concrete assessments and very scientifically accurate assessments, which are then filtered down to some really poor talking points, I think, which are espoused by both the UN and countries that support them. Um, I'd love to rattle off a dozen of those, which I've heard and not written down, but and I don't have them at my fingertips. But this idea that uh, I think is clearly illustrated uh, when in the year that Al Gore came out with that movie, an Inconvenient Truth or whatever. He shared the Nobel Prize for that with a team of European researchers. In his movie, he claimed that within a decade we would have 10 feet of sea level rise, and their estimate was more like in a century we'll have 10 centimeters. The scientist that he shared that award with. So yeah, super good on him for bringing the issue to the attention. But I think when we have those hyperbolic claims like 10 feet in a decade, we'll all be living, coastal property in Kansas, middle of Kansas, or the Alps are suddenly going to become the big island of what's left of Europe or something. It sort of causes a problem for the real science that that we need to take an accurate look at our global warming, climate warming situation. Likewise, I think the benefits of global warming need to be considered too. Having more H2O, I guess, mixed with our atmosphere is great for plants. Matter of fact, over the last 20 years, we've actually seen a greening of the Sahara Desert due to this factor. Now, we've got to get a lot more hot and moist to make the Sahara a garden again, and that's not necessarily going to be good for people. But it was great for the dinosaurs back when that happened. Anyway, so my point is we need to really look at what we're doing with accurate data and not political talking points, which unfortunately that's about what I got today, political talking points. But anyway, I do want to hear from the rest of the panel. That's kind of my 2 cents as an interested observer.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. What's your thoughts about this question? What are the primary human and natural factors contribute to the accelerated melting of glacier worldwide, and how do this change impact global sea levels and freshwater supplies? And what's your thoughts and how we can improve?
Well, the primary impact of glaciers is black carbon. So what it does is it bonds with the glacier, reduces the reflectivity of the snow, and allows heat to soak into the glacier and melt it. And so, working to eliminate those industries that produce black carbon and put them in the atmosphere would do a great deal to preventing the decline of glaciers. Glaciers, of course, as you allude to in the question, are a significant source of fresh water for the communities that are around them. And of course, as the glaciers go away, then those fresh water sources also evaporate. And as Alan pointed out, the release of the fresh water from the glaciers into the oceans is reducing the salinity in the oceans, which is causing problems with the life that exists in that ecosystem. So you really want to preserve the glaciers and not allow them to degrade as quickly as they're going. But the predominant cause is black carbon.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. David Smith, you are closely working with South Asia and different countries, especially with your IBO for urban planning. And you know, country like Bangladesh and India, they have lot of river. And when we go for smart city development and urban planning, this glacier playing a major role. So what's your thoughts? What you want to share as you closely working with Bangladesh, India, Middle East? How does glacier retreat affect the ecosystem that depends on glacier meltwater, including both flora and fauna?
Yeah, well, Dr. Shree's a great question because as you look at it with our current status and projections of where we're going with the great glaciers, there can be impacts in many different places, as Rob mentioned on the water security, the sea level, the ecosystem, and one of the big ones that gets in there is the climate feedback loops, which are going to dramatically change with some of these regions. But the global retreat, though, which is driven by this, will alter the supplying characteristics of the meltwater. And the meltwater is going to affect both the water to the people, but even some more unique things with, for example, the fish that are around where the glaciers are. As it continues to melt, it's going to change the temperatures of the water. It's going to change the mineral content in the water and others. So it's going to affect fish as well. So you see it really as part of a critical ecosystem because the meltdown provides cold, very nutrient-rich flows through the rivers, through the streams, into the lakes. And it supports not just the drinking and the flora like Rob talked about, but it will change even the sediment loads in these. It will shift the biodiversity and how the species work in it. It might increase water availability, but the long-term retreat of the glaciers and the water flow is going to probably result in reduced flows, warmer waters, and probably habitat loss going through it. So, it's going to, as we said, water change the availability, the content, the nutrient and sediment change is going to be fairly significant because the glacier water carries, in essence, the nutrients to fertilize the downstream soils. And the diminished flows from the great glacier are going to reduce this input. It's going to change the floodplain vegetation and the agricultural ecosystem that's reliant on a glacier-based irrigation that is based around the uniqueness of the melt flow from the glaciers. And you're going to see animal species have to adapt more to this cold glacial fluid environment. And particularly, like I said, the cold water fish, the terrestrial and the aquatic flora that go in there, because as the mammals and wolves and other feed on more of the fish that's going to be available as this change, you're going to see more and more of the flora which is in the water and around the water that feeds the fish, that feeds some of the others, and the amphibians. They're going to probably have real challenges with that, and you're going to see the meltwater when you get to coastal and marine plains. It's going to change this how salty the water is, and it's going to influence the blooms of plankton that are going to go, because it's going to lead to an ecosystem favoring more invasive species of animals and flora than you see before. So, Dr. Shreve, I think the big thing to answer your question is that you're going to see biodiversity losses, and you're going to see it begin to lead to different timing between the species. You're going to see regional variations all over the part of the world as places where the melt rate varies and the surrounding with it. So it's not going to be one strategy all over the global world or one scenario. It will be multiple ones depending on the regions.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions for Alan. So, in what ways does the loss of glacier contribute to the climate change feedback loops, such as change in albedo, surface reflectivity, and atmosphere circulations?
Right. Okay, yeah, looking at that, that's a difficult question. I did want to make a comment earlier. Dave mentioned all of the sort of real ways that those melting glaciers can or may affect us. I'm a retired military officer, and in my retirement turned my hand toward writing science fiction, and I found that science rapidly outpaces my capacity for fiction. But one of the themes is that's pretty solidly backed up is in society today is that we are not necessarily inoculated against viruses that went extinct before, say, 1700s, when people started understanding germ theory. And those viruses might be trapped in subsurface glacial ice from the past. As that melt happens, that will release those viruses, which conceivably we have no immunity against. It would be like COVID all over again, a virus version of that. So that's kind of a sci-fi thing. That's sort of a drastic example, but there's a greater than zero chance. I'll put it that way. It might not be a big chance of that, but greater than zero. Now, as to that your question, which is quite detailed, current science kind of says that even if we go as high as 2.7 centigrade over the next by 2100. We are still looking at losing, only having about 20% of our glaciers remaining by 2100. And if that increase in climate warming is not contained, then if we go up to say 4%, that drops to just a tiny percentage of glaciers left, and we will be dealing with all of those types of problems that David mentioned. Now, could you refresh the details of the question?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to make sure I can pontificate all day, but I want to make sure I'm on target with the question.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, yeah, loss of glacier does contribute to climate change and the feedback loop. So again, that feedback loop, as salination decreases in the ocean, that changes the types of animals that live there. I mean, they will adapt if they can, or they will go away if they can't. But ultimately, we eat sunlight. We're the biggest fish on the planet, and we eat sunlight via the algae that gets eaten by the tiny multi-celled animals that get eaten by the fish, that get eaten by the bigger fish that get hauled into the boat and served up on our tables. So the more we affect the oceans in general and that climate, there tends to be that feedback loop is one of increasing the rate of change. So, I mean, there's feedback loops can work in different ways, but as the albedo decreases, again, if we don't have shiny white polar ice caps to reflect sunlight back into space, we start absorbing more of that warmth. And as those ice caps get smaller, the amount of sunlight that we absorb grows larger, accelerating the pace of climate change. And that, concerning the albedo, but also concerning other factors. I mean, to Rob's point, we could just pollute the whole sky, right? But probably not the best solution to block sunlight coming in. There are things, I would suggest we are creating this negative feedback loop. Same problem when I was a kid. We had the same problems with the ozone, and we made major policy changes in the United States, and I'm sure around the globe, which resulted in reduction in the size of the ozone hole in the atmosphere, right? Which was starting to heat up. It's another factor toward heating up the climate. Having a good ozone layer is important. So not only do humans have a role in creating the problem, it's mea culpa, there's also the possibility for us to change that feedback loop, either break the positive feedback loop and perhaps even return that loop, make that a neutral or negative loop so that so our planet cools, or the climate cools. There was another point on that, I thought, but well, my notes I had, sea level rise, which is less significant than is often proclaimed, is still significant, and that's going to contribute to stuff too. So again, as we retreat from the coast, which probably won't be too significant for the next 50 to 100 years, but or 75 years, let's say, but subsequently could be more. Anyway, I'll turn this over to the others for an answer.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Rob, as you are making a strategy for your community and corporation, so how are communities that rely on glacier feed rivers for drinking water, agriculture, hydropower being affected, and what adaptive strategies are proving effective?
Sure. Well, certainly they have to look for alternative sources of water. Wells, you can use atmospheric harvesting, but that's kind of expensive as a way to pull water in. The thing is the communities would probably be better served trying to protect the glaciers than they would be trying to find alternatives, because the alternatives are expensive. Desalinization plants can be used to significantly supplement water sources, but a lot of the communities that are existing around glaciers aren't the most economically rich. I mean, they're not wealthy communities, and so looking at very costly solutions to offset the loss of the water source probably isn't going to be as effective as trying to protect the water source to begin with. Or perhaps relocating the community to an area that has a more sustainable water source. Moving is an option, and certainly over the thousands of years we've been in existence, cities have moved based on changes in climate, directions of rivers, etc. Historically, so the affordable way to deal with this problem is probably to relocate. The less affordable ways are to look at things. I mean, you can certainly look at wells, but remember, wells are also fed by the glaciers, and so once the glaciers go away, the wells will likely dry up over time as well, unless there's another water source. And then do recognize if you overdraw on wells, then you get salt water penetrating the well itself, and the well becomes contaminated. And so desalinization plants, they've made some significant advances recently with regard to doing low-cost desalinization using solar power. That looks very promising. But again, we're not talking about communities that are on the cutting edge of science and technology at the moment. So, and these plants are relatively complex, and they require a great deal of subject matter expertise to operate effectively. And so it's not quite the same thing as dropping into the Sierra and helping people put in clean water wells. It's a much more difficult and expensive path. So protect the glaciers whenever possible, relocate if the glaciers are drying up, and that becomes a critical water source, is probably the two best paths for the communities that are experiencing this kind of change.
Thank you. Mr. David Smith, as you have a strong this urban planning things, definitely drinking waters, agriculture, hydropowers is very important. So, what adaptive strategy are providing effective, and what's your thoughts? How you want to make a strategy for this kind of countries? Uh,
Well, you hit some of the things that I find really interesting as you begin to look at it is the strategy you really actually do have to put in place to mitigate some of the impacts. And we've talked a lot so far in this program about it, how its impact on the drinking water and how is its impact on feeding the water to the supportive animals and uh, plants and things around it. So you're going to see that, and you're going to, as Rob and said, it's going to be impact. Uh, Agriculture will be impacted, and the innovations are going to have to be there because the melting will, as we said before, provide a temporary boost to the integration irrigation, but the retreat is probably going to be reducing it over the critical growing time. So you're going to have lower crop yields. You're going to have threats to the food security in the area. And you will see it particularly having some significant impact in the Asia area and in the far North American regions as too. One of them that I didn't think of earlier, but you kind of mentioned it, and it really is true, is that if you look at the glacier fed streams, most of those have hydropower generation plants on it because it's a key energy source in mountainous regions. Uh, and it might become unreliable due to the fluctuations of the streams, the rivers that are coming from the melted glaciers, uh, particularly in the Himalayas and the Andes. It's going to compromise electrical supplies for the communities and industries. And you're going to see a broader shift there. So, what are some of the adaptive strategies, like you asked? I mean, one of them is to look at ways to manage the water and the infrastructure, in addition to dealing with the issues causing the problem. But as we look at the climate change, we look at the impacts of this, and again, there's multiple types of climate change here. But you have to look at ways to manage this in a way. So build more efficient irrigation systems. Capture as much of you can as the melt flow into reservoirs, into other things. You want to probably in those regions invest fairly heavily in some of the rainwater harvesting uh, to be a source there. And we're seeing that in particularly some of the tropical areas that are impacting the redness. Uh, we're seeing really looking at ways to store the excess water when they can. Uh, on the science side of this, on the agriculture side, there's going to be work with agricultural adaptations. How can I take the flora and try to adapt it to more drought resistant? Let me bring in new drought resistant crops, maybe, to be used there. Can I look at ways to uh, vary my crop diversification as a buffer kind of against the water availability and viability you're having? I think you're going to see in some of the areas most impacted by the glacier melting, you're going to see the economic systems in those regions change. As was said earlier, most of them are not in very large centers anyways. So the ability to try to alternate uh, diversity of industry, diversity of the economy, diversity of actually even the livelihoods for the people will probably be something that is there. And because of this being structured as it is, there needs to be new policy and community engagement, like in so many of the things you talked about, Dr. Shree. You're going to see water diplomacy. You're going to have cooperation across regions and border lines. You're going to need planning that deals not just with the water flow and the glacier strengthening, but what are the cultural aspects of that too? Because you're going to have to really engage the local stakeholders, because a lot of this is not just the water loss and the technology, it's the cultural as well. So as you can see, Dr. Sharif, this is a pretty complex problem that will bring different types of solutions to bear on it.
Thank you, Mr. David. He also bring this point, water diplomacy. So, Mr. Allen, how you want to analyze this water diplomacy, which is very, very important for South Asia, including this regional peace, because all of the conflict in between these communities for this water related things. Secondly, as all of you have a strong knowledge about technology, so basically in our communities they bring lot of idea and technology based on Belt and Road Initiative, but I want to be more realistic. So, what innovative technology and interventions are currently being used to slow glacier melting and preserve glacier ice, and how effective are they?
Thank you, Dr. Sharif. That is an awesome question. And I feel woefully unqualified to talk about glacier mitigation or glacier destruction mitigation. But sort of a related area that I have done some study in is the Great Green Wall along Africa's northern coast, the Mediterranean coast, and what they've done to stop desertification, they call it, which I think of as having a sweet treat after a meal, but that's what they call it. They spell it a little different. What am I going to say? Um, the a lot of those, it's a multifaceted approach to it's regionally different. Places like Egypt are doing things that are a little bit different than Libya, that are a little bit different than Senegal or Djibouti. But that along the coast, they have developed. I'm not sure which nation it was. I think Libya has developed or Egypt has developed a series of greenhouses. Of course, they're growing freshwater fruit crops there because that's what hungry people need, and that makes good sense. But the way they're doing it, what they noticed is that around those surrounding their carefully constructed greenhouses that are designed for moisture retention, etc., that's some moisture is still getting out, and they're getting plants growing around these big industrial-sized greenhouses. One of the things and one of the contributing factors to that is the water that they're using for these industrial-sized greenhouses is coming from the Mediterranean. So it's salinated water, which they're desalinating to provide fresh water for growing plants. They're then converting the salt, they're sifting it for rare earth minerals and other minerals that are waterborne, and they're trying to extract those, plus creating giant salt blocks, which can be used in construction, which is kind of an interesting feature. So these people are actively, working on desalinating the Mediterranean with the intent of making the Sahara greener. And I think that's if we don't want all the negative effects of desalinating the ocean, but we do want the effects of making the desert greener and growing more food for the people on the planet. So it is a balance. It's a very complex balance, and it's nothing is ever as easy as a rule, right? But the justice is never as easy as a rule. Likewise, climate change is far more complex than any other global issue that we've worked on. And that is to say, to any extent that we have worked on an issue as a planet, right there. I mean, but yes, water, how we use water, very fundamental perhaps more important than how we use air. And I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Rob, as you are also expert of technology strategy, so what innovative technology and interventions are currently being used for slow glacier melting and preserve glacial ice, and how effective are they?
Well, a number of things. Let's go through some of them. Glacial blankets. This is geotextiles. These are white blankets that are used to cover glaciers. They're used in the Swiss Alps on the Rhone Glacier, and they're used to preserve ski slopes and ice grottos. They're fairly labor intensive. It's an inexpensive technology as technologies go, but it's labor intensive, and it can introduce some microplastics into the environment because these things are typically made out of plastic and they degrade over time. And then we've got artificial snow and snow farming. This is where you use snow cannons, very similar to how you refresh a ski slope when you're not getting enough snow, but it's cold enough, and so that pumps water up on top of the glacier to replace the melting. It requires massive amounts of water and energy to do it. So you're trading one resource for another, but that's also being used. The most common area is the Mortalivi project in Switzerland, which uses autonomous snow cables to constantly refresh the snow cover on one of the major glaciers there. And one of the more interesting things are ice stupas. This is done in India. You pipe stream water vertically, and it freezes in the air into conical towers, which are called stupas, and they melt slowly during the spring. So it allows you to store water during the winter, and then you get the water back in the spring from these stupas. Then we've got some large-scale moonshot geoengineering efforts, underwater curtains. These go across the ocean floor to keep the glaciers from moving. What it does is it disrupts the ocean currents, and which often cause the glaciers to melt from the bottom up, and so this prevents that from happening and reduces slippage. And then glacial bed drying. You pump out the water that's at the base of the glacier, which is a lubricant, and that slows the glaciers drop into lower areas. And of course, air gets warmer the lower you get. So as the glacier comes down, it increasingly warms up. So you want to keep the glacier in place, and by removing the water as a lubricant, it significantly reduces the speed of the glacier's migration. And then, of course, the only really permanent solution is back to getting rid of the black carbon in the first place, which reduces substantially the glaciers melting. So none of these are mutually exclusive. Some of them are expensive, and a number of them are very resource intensive in order to do the effort. But they have very varying areas of success. And all of them are focused on preserving the glacier itself, either by replacing the ice that's melted or by reducing the erosion of the ice, either through heat or motion.
Thank you. Mr. David, as you have to work around the world as a CTO, so what role do global agreement, which is very important for South Asian context, and local policies play in glacier conservations, and what gaps exist in current framework? What's your thoughts to make all of the global and local agreement and policy?
Well, what you're asking for is a miracle, the next question, as you look through part of that. But no, there's a lot of happening in that area and some good initiatives there. But the question that Rob answered, let me throw one other thing that actually some people here in Texas are doing in some of that. They're going into some of the glacier areas, and they're drilling holes through the glacier, and they're basically putting foundation structures in to slow the movement of the glacier. And that's another approach that is being used for some of this remediation. And the professor here is interesting on that one because his professorship is in the petroleum land management, so it's in the petroleum side. And they do the same thing as they stabilize petroleum fields and things. And he's saying, why can't we do it for the glaciers? And as an analogy, it kind of makes sense. So that is one thing that's still going to be happening to protect them. But to get into the global agreements, uh, there's a lot of them. The Paris Agreement back in 2015 impacts this because it was to limit global warming to 1.5 and reduce the greenhouse. But then the United Nations declared 2025 as the International Year of Glacier Preservation. And it really is designed to highlight what's a glacier's role in the water system, in the climate systems, in the agricultural system, and others, and how it impacts the life cycle around it. Uh, so this international year from the UN is to do it, and it actually establishes March 21st as a World Day for glaciers. Glaciers. But going back even further than that, there were international treaties like in the Arctic and Antarctic to look at focus on preserving glaciers. Uh, there's others like biodiversity frameworks and others coming in place. But one of them that I find interesting is there's some emerging proposals, particularly coming out of one of the internal groups at the UN for a global treaty to prohibit glacier exploitation, particularly in protected sites. Uh, and they're trying to look at how to do this and put uh, transbordery water governance there because, again, these glaciers oftentimes cross borders and going to so it's a more comprehensive view of it. Uh, but there also needs to be local policies in this too. Uh, for example, glacier protection laws. In South America, one of the countries there, I think I'll go from Argentina, has a public law that they safeguard the water resources. They ban pollutants. They ban mining close to it, and particularly things which, like what Rob was saying, we're looking at the carbon that can be put to change the reflectivity of the ice because the glacier ice reflects about 90% of the energy back up. Anything that changes that is going to cause it to melt more. So you see that. You're going to have to do protected areas. And we're seeing that, for example, here in the United States at the UN United States Glacier National Park to limit access and to even limit uh, exposure to them by people outside the community. And you're going to have to do community things because there's gaps. Because right now we do not have really good monitoring in many places. There's data deficiencies. Uh, and these need to kind of look at how to do them in a way that data helps drive your decisions. It will help drive regulatory, it will help drive science going to it. Uh, and there is also liabilities, legal liabilities that are being created around these as you try to manage and put a framework in place. And some of the frameworks have land grants and industry grants and things around the glaciers, so those have to be done. So you have to just do in the regulatory side, a really holistic view that looks at glaciers in both the problem, its place in the ecosystem, its place in the governance frameworks, and the interlocutor frameworks that need to be put in place to deal with multiple communities, multiple regions, multiple governments. So
Okay.
thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. What's your thought about the the same question: what role do global agreement and local policies play in glacier conservations, and what gaps exist in the current framework?
I love you, Dr. Sharif. You always hit me with these questions. These are great questions, and I'm glad we've got people that are focused on it. Um, yeah, I think of any project one undertakes, and I'd like to use the example of a farm. It's not just the land on the farm that one has to um, bring into the calculations to make that farm productive, right? The water, is there a river nearby? What's the average rainfall, et cetera? Or simply, is there enough water to grow crops? Uh, is the land tillable, which might be a regional issue? And the same is true with our global climate situation. And I think without, as I mentioned at the beginning, yes, the Earth is losing its internal heat to its atmospheric zone, and that has an effect on climate change. Clearly, solar energy has an effect on climate change. When we talk about the albedo of the ice fields. Um, it's not they wouldn't need to do anything if there wasn't tons of solar energy being applied to them on a daily basis. So uh, I think this idea of having better science to study these things and to study them kind of, how can I say this, to boldly let the facts lead us where we need to go, as opposed to um, slogans or whatever else, but again, what we want is a model for human flourishing overall. And I like to think that nothing is simple, or it's a lot of times it's simple, but it's not easy, I guess. Um, for example, if we really wanted to conserve our planet's resources, we would make products that were durable, that would last for years, and we would sell them once, and then we would start a new company, and we would do something else that was incredibly durable and would last. But the other kind of factor that goes along with that is we don't do that, right? Because there's no profit in it. We build it as cheaply as possible. It breaks, and it used to be we break and repair it. Now we just break and replace. And we're designing more and more of our planetary infrastructure to do just that. And I think it calls for, there's no way one can look at their personal village, town, or city, as I look around my own little area, and say, here's what I've got to do to solve this, right? These are transnational, transcontinental, transocean circumstances, right? These are circumstance being the combination of people, places, and events, right? And these areas will require a new level of diplomacy, a higher level of adherence to accuracy about what's going on, scientific resolve, and really a fundamental change in the way we perceive our stewardship of the planet. And I think, thank you, Rob, for that amazing, I was like, hey, I don't know about glaciers. I know about this one project in Africa. But you gave us a great list of glacier reduction mitigation factors and science and technology. And that is amazingly awesome and what we need to be doing. The key is going to be, how do we get people to do it? And like I said, they're already doing some of these in places where they're directly impacted. But as each of us have pointed out in this hour, we are not able to deal with this it's like the little kid who opens the front door, because we want to run the air conditioner because there's global warming, right? We're going to open up the door and let the cool air out. It just doesn't work that way. And so we need accurate scientific observation first and modeling to work on these projects and to spread the word about these scientific things. Yeah, thank you, Rob, for that. And and likewise, this project that David mentioned about using the same techniques that we use to stabilize the oil fields in Texas to stabilize the glaciers across the globe. What a great idea! I'm from Texas, and I like to get involved in local projects, and if exporting that locally exporting that local project to the glaciers of the world turns out to be a good thing, I certainly want to be involved in that. But to further answer the question, I simply think the level of scientific cooperation, political cooperation, social cooperation, the more communication about the topic that we can express. I mean, God bless the UN for making 2025 the year of the glacier. I didn't find out about it till the 15th of December. So, and it's not a problem we can solve in a year. It's an attitudinal change amongst the people that live on Spaceship Earth, as Buckminster Fuller called it. And we're all crew of Spaceship Earth. So I'll stop preaching to the choir here and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rob. If current trend continue, what is the projected state of the world glacier over the next 50 years? And what urgent measures are needed to prevent catastrophic impact?
Well, things aren't looking good. Right now, we're on track to increase global temperatures by about 2.7 degrees centigrade by 2100. And that means the world's glaciers are facing a max extinction event. Even if we were to stop all carbon production right now, the momentum for this is already in place, and we would still lose about 1/3 of the world heritage sites. The Alps would lose about 50% of their current volume, and the Himalayas and Andes, while the meltwater would meet peak water. In other words, that they have an excess of water for a while. Once those glaciers melted, of course, then they're completely out. You go from abundance to the lack thereof, and that can be a lot worse than just a gradual withdrawal, because then people start wasting the material, and then you don't have any, and they don't have the practices to maintain whatever's left. Let's see, we're talking about 68% of the world's glaciers gone by 2100. Western Canada, US, and Central Europe will become effectively ice-free. I should point out that we're kind of effectively ice-free here this year. It's very bizarre here in Oregon. No snow whatsoever. Typically, we have had a lot of snow by now, but zip-dee-doo-dah at the moment. And then if we have high emissions, where we get 4 degrees centigrade increase, which is possible for the U.S. pulling back on any mitigation programs, then 83% of the glaciers are gone by 2100. And the complete collapse of the water towers in Central Asia, South America, which would trigger severe agricultural failure for billions of Americans. So for anybody that's going to be around in 2100, which probably won't be me, it's going to be pretty dire. The lack of water.
Thank you for joining. I'm sure Athena will be here in any second. And thank you again for joining and your time.
Excuse me. Sorry for that. I must attend another meeting right now. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Dave, Dr. Sharif, as always, you do a fantastic job. So thank you, and I'm glad to check out.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's where we are. And I'll pass over.
Yeah. Mr. David Smith, what is your strategy or answer for this question?
Well, I agree with Ron. The trend's continuing as we go there, and particularly if we look at some of the scenarios on both sides of it, the worst case and the best case scenario, there's quite a big range in there. But some of the forecasts I've seen actually expect the disappearance of glaciers to kind of peak over the next 50 years and then improve from some of their modeling they've done. But it really looks at how can we do the mitigation on that. And that is not factored into most of these forecasts, kind of like the one Al Gore made decades ago. He didn't forecast all the other changes that were going to be happening as well too. And that's some of the forecasts I've seen here as a futurist are very narrow and not well thought out. So you're going to see some places where the impacts are going to be much greater. The low latitude, the mid latitude glaciers, uh, you're going to see uh, extensive loss there, extensive loss. At some forecasts I've seen up to 90%. But then you look at in some of the high mountain areas, for example, the Himalayas, you're going to see not as severe of a loss, but still a large loss, which will really threaten the water supply and the energy supplies in those regions. The polar regions, though, like Greenland, Antarctica, uh, they have accelerating melting of their ice sheet, but you're also seeing there that they're adding feet to it. If you look at Greenland, uh, since the last 10 years, they've added 20 feet back to their ice sheet during these 10 years. So you see regional impacts. The polar regions are not going to be impacted as much. Uh, so I agree. With what was said, particularly by Rob, how do we aggressively uh, cut the carbon that is hitting these areas? And the 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 forestation around the glaciers is also being deforested right now, which is changing the environmental conditions there as well. And so, how do you do that? How do you put the carbon cuts in place? How do you get the international collaboration there? I think with the UN declaring 2025 as the International Year of Glaciers, uh, should have been leveraged more and used to help on this. Again, you have to go back and look at the strategies, the frameworks, the governance, particularly the water management, infrastructure management, and and how that affects the community. And you're going to see community changes like you yourself, Dr. Sharif, queued up earlier as you were talking about these areas. But there are some really interesting, innovative approaches too. There's the geo-engineering approaches like Rob was talking about with the underwater curtains, anchoring the glaciers. Can I make artificial snow, artificial ice, and can I do that in a way to handle it? And while some of these are expensive, it might be worth that when you begin to look at an ROI across the regions. But I think we're going to see more and more geoengineering type of approaches come out to play. But this is something that we really have to begin to look at across all the diversity of our systems that can be applied to effectively deal with this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. My final question, Mr. Rob, what's your closing remarks for today?
Well, glaciers are a very important worldwide resource and they should be protected. There are easy ways to do it, just mitigating dark carbon, black carbon would do a lot to preventing the glaciers from evaporating. We've got another number of technological efforts that are in place to protect some of the larger ones, but most of these efforts are inadequate. The problem we've got really is how do you get people motivated to solve a problem that won't become a crisis till after a lot of us are dead? And that's always been an issue of a sacrifice today for a benefit for our progeny in the future, and we just as a race don't seem to be that good at doing these kinds of things. And I think fundamentally that needs to change. Part of it is really providing the underlying information and assuring the information sources. So much of our information regarding climate change is corrupted, and that's problematic. And it's problematic on both sides. A lot of the information coming in that is seemingly beneficial is also corrupted, and so we need a focus on critical thinking. We need to focus on assuring our information sources, and we need to prioritize the resources we've got to preserve the race so that the race can continue into the future. And we're not doing that. That's where I would think the focus is. So much of our problems are sourced in bad information, and until that's solved, I'm not convinced that we'll be able to put the resources on this that are needed. And without resourcing this properly, the dire outcome is effectively predetermined.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith. What's your closing remarks for today?
As Rob said, there's a lot happening with different ways to address this. We're seeing some of the global frameworks like the Paris agreements, the other frameworks coming in place, but these have to be coupled with local policies as well to work, because you need to provide the essential tools to mitigate this where possible. And the total mitigation of it has to be done on a global basis. So you have to begin to look at there. It's really clear, though, that these frozen glaciers are under siege from some of climate change, and that it's going to affect our water security. It's going to affect our ecosystems, our biodiversity, even the local animals and fish and the local economies. And we need to look at how to look at the feedback loops like reducing while keeping the reflection of the glacier high by controlling the things that we can around it. We need to look at innovations technology, like some of the new artificial glaciers being done in some of the area, and how to impact that. But really the path forward needs to look at how can we limit carbon, how can we look at to meet some of the targets that came out of the forests, how can we scale up collecting data, the monitoring, how can we collect the information in a way that lets us begin to geoengineer where feasible. And we really need to foster big time the international collaboration to fill the policy gaps. And we need to look at ways to do this, because time is important when it comes to these, particularly the impacts on the communities. For example, a big one with the hydroelectric. The electric goes well beyond just the local systems around the glacier, but it can affect the whole country and region as well. So, Dr. Sharif, thank you.
Thank you for this excellent show. Thank you, Mr. Rob, and thank you, Mr. David. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible, because this show is very important for South Asia, specifically this India and Bangladesh and Himalaya and Bay of Bengals. And beside that, I think we already shared this content with the politicians, with largest corporations, embassy, Bangladesh armies and Indian armies, and hopefully through this dialogue you can learn many interesting things, and you can make better policy. And definitely our expert like David Smith, Mr. Rob, and Alan, they may collaborate with our institutions. Thank you, Mr. David Smith, and thank you, Mr. Rob, for your excellent contribution for today's sessions. Thank you, bye bye, and take care.